The awakening. John's eyes fluttered open, but something felt off. His room was quiet, yet his heart pounded in his chest as though he had been running a marathon in his sleep. He blinked, adjusting to the soft morning light streaming through the blinds, and turned his head to the side. That's when he saw her. A woman lay on the other side of his bed, her back partially turned toward him. But this was no ordinary woman. Her skin shimmered faintly, a pale blue hue that seemed to glow subtly in the dim light. Her hair, an iridescent silver, fanned out over the pillow like liquid light. For a moment, John thought he was dreaming. "What the?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The sound must have reached her. She stirred, turning her head slightly to face him. John's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes, large and otherworldly, were a deep, swirling violet, with faint golden rings that seemed to pulse faintly, like ripples in a still pond. She didn't look scared or surprised. If anything, her gaze was calm, almost knowing. John scrambled back against the headboard, his blanket tangled around his legs. "Who? What? Who are you?" His voice cracked with a mix of fear and confusion. The woman opened her mouth, but the words that came out were nothing John had ever heard before. It was a language unlike any he knew, a series of melodic tones and clicks that filled the room. Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but her expression was urgent, as though she needed him to understand. I don't know what you're saying," John stammered, his eyes darting around the room. Had someone broken in? Was this some elaborate prank? But who could fake this? The woman frowned slightly, then glanced at a strange metallic device on her wrist. The gadget blinked with small, glowing symbols that floated above its surface like a hologram. She pressed a button, and the symbols shifted, rearranging themselves rapidly. After a moment, she looked back at him and spoke again, this time in broken, heavily accented English. "Danger. You, danger. Earth, danger." John blinked, his mind racing. "What do you mean? Who are you? How did you get here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the ceiling. John followed her gesture and froze. A shimmering projection filled the space above them, casting a faint glow over the room. It was a map of stars and galaxies, intricate and beautiful. But one section of the map was highlighted in red, with Earth at its center. Lines of alien text scrolled beside the image, unreadable to John but clearly alarming to her. Wait, hold on," John said, his voice rising. "What is that? What are you showing me?" She didn't respond. Instead, she reached out, her cool, slender fingers brushing against his arm. John flinched, but her touch wasn't threatening. It was gentle, almost desperate. She locked eyes with him, and for a brief moment, John felt an overwhelming flood of emotions, not his own, but hers. Fear, urgency, hope. A sudden, sharp noise broke the moment. It sounded like a low hum, growing louder by the second. John's apartment vibrated slightly, the objects on his nightstand rattling. He whipped his head toward the window and saw a flash of light outside. Shadows moved on the street below, men in dark, tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets. "What the hell is going on?" John muttered, panic creeping into his voice. The woman sat up abruptly, her movements quick and fluid. She pointed at the door, then back at him. "Danger. They come. Hide. Hide? Hide where?" John asked, his voice rising. He didn't have time to get an answer. The door to his apartment burst open with a deafening crash. Heavy boots stomped into the living room, accompanied by sharp, clipped commands in a language John didn't recognize. The woman grabbed his hand, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. "Come," she said firmly, dragging him toward the far corner of the room. Her wrist device blinked again, and with a wave of her hand, a shimmering oval-shaped portal appeared against the wall. It crackled with energy, casting strange shadows across the room. John gaped at the portal, then at her. "You've got to be kidding me." She didn't wait for his consent. With a strength that belied her slender frame, she pulled him forward. The last thing John saw before stepping into the portal was a group of armed men bursting into his bedroom, their weapons aimed directly at him and the woman. The portal swallowed them in a flash of light, and the room disappeared. The intrusion. The sensation of falling hit John like a tidal wave, even though his feet were firmly planted on solid ground. The world around him spun and blurred as he stumbled forward, clutching his knees to catch his breath. The air was thick and warm, tinged with the scent of something metallic, like scorched iron. When his vision cleared, John froze. They weren't in his apartment anymore. They stood in the middle of an expansive field, but it wasn't grass beneath their feet. It was some kind of glowing, soft material that shifted hues with every step, pulsating like a heartbeat. Towering trees, their trunks twisting upward like spirals of glass, reached into a sky painted in shades of lavender and gold. Two suns hovered on the horizon, their light casting double shadows behind him. It was beautiful and utterly alien. John turned to the woman, who was scanning the area with her strange wrist device. Her glowing skin seemed to blend with the surreal landscape, making her look like she belonged here. He, on the other hand, felt like an intruder. "Where are we?" he managed to croak. She didn't answer, her violet eyes focused intently on the hologram projected from her wrist. John stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. The map from earlier was still there, but now it showed their current location, a blinking blue dot in the middle of a swirling nebula. He didn't need to be an astrophysicist to know they weren't anywhere near Earth. This isn't possible," John said, shaking his head. "How did we get here? What even is this place?" The woman looked up, her expression sharp. "Safe, for now," she said in her halting English. "But not long." John was about to demand answers when a high-pitched screech tore through the air. The sound was unearthly, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The woman's posture stiffened, her glowing wrist device flickering in response. She grabbed his arm again, her grip tighter this time. "They follow," she said urgently. Her voice carried a weight that made John's stomach sink. "Who's following?" "Those guys with the guns." He looked around, expecting to see the armed men from his apartment. Instead, he saw something far worse. A rippling distortion appeared in the air, a few feet away, like heat waves rising from asphalt on a summer day. The distortion grew larger, twisting and bending until it snapped into place. Out stepped three figures, clad in sleek, black armor that shimmered like liquid obsidian. Their helmets had no visors, only smooth surfaces that reflected the strange landscape. Each carried a weapon that hummed ominously, emitting a faint blue glow. "They're not from Earth," John whispered, his voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she pulled him into a run, her speed unnaturally fast for someone her size. John struggled to keep up, his sneakers skidding on the shifting ground. Behind them, the armored figures raised their weapons, and bolts of blue energy shot through the air, narrowly missing them. "This can't be happening," John shouted, ducking as another bolt zipped past his head. "What did you get me into?" The woman glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "You? Important," she said simply. "Important? I'm just a guy from Brooklyn." John snapped, but he didn't have time to argue. The ground ahead suddenly sloped downward into a dense forest, the glowing trees casting eerie patterns of light and shadow. She darted into the woods without hesitation, and John had no choice but to follow. The forest was alive with sounds, chirps, clicks, and low rumbles that made John's skin crawl. The glowing trees provided little cover, but the woman seemed to know where she was going. She led him to a large, hollowed-out tree trunk and gestured for him to crawl inside. "You want me to hide in there?" John hissed. She nodded firmly. "Quiet. Wait." Before he could argue, she pressed a button on her wrist device, and the tree's outer bark shimmered, becoming almost transparent. John crouched inside, his breathing shallow as he watched the woman step out into the open. She raised her wrist device, and a faint blue field rippled around her. The armored figures arrived moments later, their movements silent and precise. They stopped a few feet from the tree, scanning the area with their weapons raised. John's heart hammered in his chest as he watched, praying they wouldn't find him. The woman stepped forward, her arms raised in a gesture of surrender. The figures turned to her, and for a brief moment, John thought she was about to be captured. But then, with a sudden, fluid motion, she pressed another button on her device, and a blinding flash of light erupted from it. The figures stumbled, their armor flickering as if short-circuiting. "Now," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. John didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out of the tree and ran toward her. The woman grabbed his hand, and they took off deeper into the forest, leaving the disoriented figures behind. As they ran, John couldn't help but glance at her, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? What was she running from? And why did he feel like he was about to be dragged into something far bigger than himself? For now, though, he had only one priority: survive. The chase. John hit the ground hard, the air knocked from his lungs as the portal spat him out. He coughed, blinking rapidly to adjust to his new surroundings. The sky above him wasn't Earth's. It was split into streaks of crimson and gold, with two massive moons hanging low on the horizon like twin sentinels. The ground beneath him was coarse and dark, a mixture of cracked obsidian and strange, moss-like growths that shimmered faintly. He rolled onto his side, gasping. The alien woman stood nearby, completely composed, her glowing wrist device active. She was scanning the area, her sharp violet eyes darting around like a hawk surveying its prey. "Do you ever give a warning before throwing someone through a freaking portal?" John rasped, clutching his ribs. "Quiet," she hissed, her tone low but commanding. Before he could argue, a low hum began to rise in the distance. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was more like the deep, resonant thrum of a massive horn. It vibrated in his chest, setting every nerve on edge. The woman's gaze snapped toward the horizon, her glowing device flashing red. "They come," she said, urgency lacing her words. She reached down, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. "Who? What now?" John asked, still winded, but she didn't answer. Instead, she started pulling him forward, her pace quick and purposeful. The hum grew louder, and John turned his head just in time to see something burst through the portal they had just escaped. It wasn't the men from Earth. These were different. Sleek, insect-like machines crawled through the shimmering gateway, their bodies black as night and covered in pulsating red lights. They moved unnaturally fast, their legs clicking and snapping against the ground as they swarmed. "What the hell are those?" John's voice cracked, panic setting in. "Hunters," the woman replied curtly. She didn't look back, her focus entirely on the uneven terrain ahead. "They look like nightmares," John exclaimed, stumbling as he tried to keep up. "Do they have lasers? Tell me they don't have lasers." The woman didn't answer, but the loud, crackling sound behind them told him everything he needed to know. A burst of red energy shot past them, narrowly missing his shoulder and hitting a nearby boulder. The rock exploded into shards, scattering like shrapnel. "Great, they have lasers," John muttered, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman suddenly veered to the left, dragging him into a dense cluster of jagged, spire-like plants. The growths emitted a faint bioluminescent glow, casting eerie shadows around them. John tripped over a root and fell hard, but before he could get up, the woman crouched beside him and pressed a finger to her lips. "Quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She tapped her wrist device, and a translucent dome of light enveloped them. The sound outside the dome dulled instantly, like someone had hit the mute button on reality. John lay flat, his breath shallow, as the hunters scuttled closer. Their movements were unnervingly precise, each step deliberate and calculated. The machines spread out, their glowing red sensors scanning the area. One of them stopped mere feet from their hiding spot, its sleek body swiveling as it emitted a series of rapid mechanical clicks. John's palms were slick with sweat. He wanted to move, to run, but the woman's hand on his chest kept him still. She locked eyes with him, her expression hard but calm. The hunter lingered for a moment, its red light sweeping across the spire-like plants. Then, with a sharp chirp, it moved on, joining the others as they scoured the area. After what felt like an eternity, the hum began to fade. The hunters disappeared over the ridge, their glowing forms swallowed by the alien landscape. The woman exhaled and deactivated the dome, the protective light flickering out. Safe. For now. John sat up, his muscles trembling. Safe. That's your definition of safe. I almost got turned into space rubble. The woman ignored his outburst, standing and checking her wrist device. They track us, she said, her tone grim. Portal. Leave trail. Well, that's just fantastic, John said, running a hand through his hair. So, what's the plan? Do you even have one, or are we just running until we drop? She looked at him, her gaze steady. Need, time. Find place. No trail. And how exactly do we do that? He asked, throwing his arms up in frustration. Do you have a magic hiding spot somewhere on this rock? She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pointed toward a jagged mountain in the distance, its peak glowing faintly. There. John followed her gaze and sighed. Of course. It's always the creepy glowing mountain. Why wouldn't it be? Without waiting for his agreement, she started walking, her pace brisk. John groaned but followed, his legs heavy and his mind swirling with questions. As they trudged toward the mountain, the faint hum returned, a reminder that the hunters were never far behind. The truth. John's muscles ached as he leaned against the cold, uneven wall of the cave. The flickering light from Kara's wrist device cast dancing shadows on the damp, jagged rock surrounding them. Outside, the faint hum of the hunters had finally faded, leaving only the eerie silence of the alien forest. It felt too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. Kara crouched near the mouth of the cave, her glowing skin dimmer than usual. She had been silent since they escaped the hunters, her focus entirely on the holographic map hovering above her wrist. John, however, couldn't hold his tongue any longer. All right, enough, he said, his voice bouncing off the cave walls. What's going on? Why are they after you? And more importantly, why the hell am I in the middle of this? Kara glanced at him, her violet eyes unreadable. For a moment, she didn't respond, and John thought she might ignore him entirely. But then she sighed, a sound that carried exhaustion and something else he couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe. You? Important, she said finally, her words slow and deliberate. John laughed humorlessly. You keep saying that, but you're not exactly giving me the important treatment here. I've been shot at, dragged through portals, and chased by killer space robots. Start making sense. Kara turned off her device, and a hologram vanished. She moved closer to him, her gaze intense. You? Earth. All in danger. Danger from what? John pressed. The hunters. The men from Earth. What are we talking about here? She hesitated, then raised her wrist device again, this time projecting an image of a massive ship. A ship so large it made the hunters look like insects in comparison. It was sleek and menacing, with rows of glowing red lights that looked like eyes. Around it swirled dozens of smaller ships, moving in perfect synchronization like a swarm of locusts. Invasion, Kara said, her voice grim. She pointed to the massive ship. My people, come. Take Earth. Destroy. John's heart sank. He stared at the hologram, trying to process her words. Wait. Your people? You're saying you're one of them. Kara nodded slowly, her expression hardening. Yes. Defect. Defect, John repeated, his mind reeling. You mean you turned against them? She nodded again, this time more firmly. I see truth. Earth, not enemy. My people lie. Say humans, dangerous, threat. But they want your world. Resources, power. John ran a hand down his face, the weight of her words sinking in. So let me get this straight. Your people think we're some kind of threat, but really, they just want to take over Earth. And you, what decided to warn us? Yes, Kara said, her tone softening. I steal this. She gestured to her wrist device. Data. Plans. They know. Now, they hunt me. John stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration washing over him. You risk your life to warn us, he said quietly. Why? Kara's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something deeply human in them. Fear, hope, determination. I see humans. Not all bad. Fight for family. For home. My people forget what that means. John's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to deny that humanity was worth saving. After all, Earth was full of problems. Wars, greed, corruption. But the way she looked at him, like she still believed in something better, made it hard to disagree. Before he could respond, a distant rumble shook the cave. Kara's head snapped toward the entrance, her posture tense. She activated her wrist device, and the map reappeared, showing a cluster of red dots moving closer. They find us, she said, standing quickly. No time. Great, John muttered, grabbing a loose rock from the ground. I guess we're running again. Kara shook her head. No, we fight. John blinked at her. Fight. With what? I've got a rock, and you've got, well, alien tech, but still. There's no way we can take them. Kara didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a sequence of buttons on her device, and the hologram shifted, revealing a schematic of the cave. A small glowing node appeared near the back wall. There, she said, pointing. Energy source. Overload. Cave collapse. Trap them. John stared at her in disbelief. You're saying we bury ourselves alive? That's your plan? Not us, Kara replied, already moving toward the node. Only them. Trust me. John hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. But something about the way she moved, calm, confident, determined, made him swallow his fear. All right, he said, gripping his rock tighter. But if we survive this, you owe me a lot of answers. Kara didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something close to gratitude in her eyes. Deal. The hum of the hunters grew louder, echoing through the cave like a warning. John took a deep breath and followed her deeper into the shadows, ready for whatever came next. The betrayal. John's wrists burned from the tight restraints as he was dragged through a long, sterile hallway. The walls were smooth and metallic, reflecting the harsh white lights above. He could barely keep his balance as the two men in tactical gear shoved him forward. Behind him, Kara walked in silence, her face a mask of stoic defiance. Her hands were bound with some kind of glowing cuffs that emitted a faint hum. Keep moving, one of the guards growled, his voice distorted by his helmet. John glanced over his shoulder at Kara, his mind racing. Everything had happened so fast. The hunters had been closing in, and then, just as they triggered the cave collapse, the men from Earth had arrived, armed with tech that looked suspiciously alien. They had captured them both before the dust even settled. They were led into a large chamber, its walls lined with monitors displaying complex data streams and maps of star systems. In the center of the room stood a tall man in a crisp black suit, his hands clasped behind his back. His salt and pepper hair and sharp, calculating eyes gave him an air of authority and danger. Welcome, the man said smoothly, his voice calm but laced with menace. You've caused quite a stir. John was shoved into a metal chair, his restraints clinking as they secured him to the armrests. Kara was seated beside him, her glowing cuffs locking into a device that appeared to neutralize her wrist tech. The guard stepped back, standing at attention as the man in the suit approached. "I'm Director Kane," he said, his gaze sweeping over John before settling on Kara. "And you, my dear, are quite the prize." Kara didn't respond, her eyes narrowing slightly. Kane smiled coldly. "Do you know how long we've been monitoring your kind? Decades. And yet you walk right into our hands, bringing your little friend along. How convenient." John couldn't stay silent. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. "And why do you have alien tech? You're supposed to be protecting Earth." "Not protecting Earth," Kane interrupted, arching an eyebrow. "Oh, we are. But protection requires power, Mr. Carter. And power requires resources." He turned to a nearby console, pressing a few buttons. A hologram appeared, showing a sleek black ship orbiting Earth. It was unmistakably alien, its design eerily similar to the hunters that had chased them earlier. "We've known about the invasion for years," Kane continued. "Your friend here merely confirmed what we suspected. The aliens want Earth, and they're willing to destroy it to get what they want. But we don't plan to let that happen." John frowned, confused. "Then why are you treating us like prisoners? She's trying to help you." Kane laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Help us? You think she's doing this out of the goodness of her heart? Don't be naive. She's a fugitive, a traitor to her kind. Her motives are irrelevant." He turned back to Kara, his expression hardening. "What is relevant is the technology she's carrying. With it, we can build defenses, weapons, an army capable of repelling any invasion. Humanity will finally take its rightful place, not just as survivors, but as conquerors." John's stomach turned. "Conquerors? You're no better than the aliens planning to invade us." Kane's smile vanished. He stepped closer, leaning down until he was eye level with John. "Spare me your moral outrage. This is survival. You should be thanking me for ensuring your species has a future." Kara broke her silence, her voice calm but cutting. "You destroy yourselves. Fight like them. Become like them." Kane straightened, his face unreadable. "We don't have time for lectures from an alien traitor." He gestured to one of the guards. "Take her to the lab. Extract what we need." John's blood ran cold. "Wait, what? Extract? What does that mean?" Kane didn't look at him. "It means we'll get the data and technology we need, by any means necessary." John struggled against his restraints, his voice rising. "You can't do this. She's the only reason we even know what's coming. If you hurt her, you're dooming all of us." Kane glanced at him, his expression dismissive. "You're irrelevant, Carter. Just a pawn in a much larger game." The guards moved toward Kara, their hands gripping her arms as they lifted her from the chair. She didn't resist, but her eyes met John's, a flicker of determination passing between them. "Wait," John shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "I can help. She left something with me, something you'll need." Kane paused, narrowing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" John leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. "Her device, it left a backup. If you let her go, I'll show you where it is." Kara's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Kane studied him for a long moment, then smiled thinly. "You're lying." "I'm not," John insisted. "But if you hurt her, you'll never find it." Kane considered this, then nodded to the guards. "Take him to holding. We'll see if he's telling the truth." John was dragged from the room, his mind racing. He had no plan, no device, and no idea how to save Kara. But one thing was clear: if he didn't act fast, both of them were as good as dead. The rescue. John sat in the cold, windowless holding cell, his mind racing. The dull hum of machinery vibrated through the walls, and a faint red glow pulsed from the ceiling light, casting long, eerie shadows. He couldn't stop thinking about Kara, her calm defiance as she was dragged away, the unspoken message in her eyes. "Don't give up. Easier said than done, he muttered, his fists clenching against the steel table in front of him. Then he felt it, a faint vibration in his pocket. His heart leaped as he remembered the small round device Kara had slipped to him during their capture. She had pressed it into his palm, whispering one word: trust. Somehow, the guards had missed it during their search. Carefully, he pulled it out, shielding it from the security camera in the corner of the cell. The device was no bigger than a marble, but it hummed faintly with energy. As he turned it in his hand, it lit up, projecting a tiny hologram of Kara's face. Escape protocol, her recorded voice said, calm and precise. Activate when safe. John took a deep breath. Safe. That's a joke, he muttered, but he pressed the center of the device anyway. The marble-sized gadget emitted a high-pitched tone, and suddenly, the steel door of his cell unlocked with a soft click. John's jaw dropped. No way, he whispered, pushing the door open slightly and peeking into the hallway. The corridor was empty, save for the flickering red emergency lights. It seemed the device had triggered more than just his cell. He stepped out cautiously, clutching the device like a lifeline. His sneakers barely made a sound against the polished floor as he moved. He didn't know where Kara was being held, but he had a feeling the lab Kane mentioned wasn't far. As he turned a corner, the sound of footsteps froze him in place. 2 guards in black tactical gear were approaching, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. John's heart raced as he ducked behind a storage crate, his mind scrambling for a plan. The device in his hand buzzed, and a small projection of a map appeared, highlighting a route past the guards. John blinked. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. But he didn't have a better idea, so he followed the glowing path. He waited until the guards passed, then crept along the wall, slipping through a side door the device indicated. Inside, he found himself in a storage room filled with alien tech. Guns, gadgets, and glowing containers humming with energy. One particular weapon caught his eye. A sleek, rifle-like device with a pulsating blue core. It looked intimidating and, more importantly, useful. John grabbed it, slinging it over his shoulder. "I don't know how to use this, but here's hoping it's point and shoot." The map on the device updated, directing him through a series of maintenance tunnels. The deeper he went, the louder the sounds of machinery and voices grew. He finally reached a large, reinforced door. The hologram blinked, displaying a countdown. 20 seconds to security override. John's palms were sweaty as he pressed against the wall, watching the timer tick down. The door unlocked with a hiss, and he slipped inside, finding himself on an elevated walkway overlooking a massive lab. Below, Kara was strapped to a platform surrounded by glowing restraints. Scientists in white coats moved frantically, working on machines that hummed with alien energy. Director Kane stood at the far end, his expression calm as he oversaw the operation. "Extract the data," Kane ordered. "I want results within the hour." John's gut twisted. He couldn't wait any longer. He gripped the rifle tightly, aiming it at the closest control panel. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, pulling the trigger. A bolt of blue energy shot out, striking the panel in a burst of sparks. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted in the lab. Scientists scattered, and guards rushed toward the walkway. John ducked, firing blindly as he ran along the platform. Kara's eyes snapped open, and she looked directly at him. Her expression was equal parts surprise and relief. She struggled against her restraints, and John shouted, "Hold on. I'm coming." He leaped off the walkway, landing awkwardly but managing to keep his grip on the rifle. A guard charged him, but John swung the weapon like a club, knocking the man out cold. "Okay, not just a blaster," he muttered. As he reached Kara, her wrist device flickered faintly, struggling against the suppressor. "Free me," she said, her voice strained. John fumbled with the glowing restraints, finally finding a release mechanism. The cuffs snapped open, and Kara bolted upright, grabbing the rifle from him in one fluid motion. "You're welcome," John said, breathless. Kara didn't respond. Instead, she raised the rifle and fired, taking out 3 guards with precise shots. She handed it back to him, her eyes blazing with determination. "We go. Now." Together, they fought their way out, using Kara's device to navigate through the facility. As they reached the exit, a massive explosion rocked the building, sending shockwaves through the air. "What did you do?" John shouted as they ran. Kara glanced back, a faint smirk on her lips. "Disable lab. No more experiments." John shook his head, unable to believe what they'd just pulled off. But as they disappeared into the night, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The last stand. The wind howled through the shattered remains of the facility as John and Kara stood at the edge of a rocky cliff, overlooking the chaos below. The lab was engulfed in flames, its once sleek towers reduced to smoldering wreckage. In the distance, Kane's forces regrouped, their tactical vehicles and drones spreading out like a swarm of angry hornets. John clutched the alien rifle, his hands trembling. "So, what's the plan now? Because I'm running out of miracles here." Kara adjusted her wrist device, her expression steely. The map it projected showed a single blinking point, a massive energy surge deep beneath the facility. "Portal generator," she said. "Key to invasion. Must destroy." John stared at the map, then at the army forming below. "Right, just the 2 of us against an army. Sounds like a solid plan." Kara didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly. Not alone. She tapped a sequence on her device, and a soft hum filled the air. Moments later, a sleek alien ship descended from the clouds, its hull glinting like polished obsidian. John's jaw dropped. "You've had a ship this whole time." "Hidden," Kara said simply, gesturing for him to follow. The ship's hatch opened with a hiss, revealing a compact but advanced cockpit. Kara slid into the pilot's seat, her hands moving deftly over the controls. The ship roared to life, and John barely had time to strap himself into the co-pilot's chair before they were airborne. "All right," John said, gripping the armrests tightly. "I'm guessing subtlety isn't part of the plan." Kara's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smirk. "No." The ship dove toward the facility, weaving through enemy fire with unnatural precision. Kara's piloting was flawless, each movement smooth and deliberate. The targeting system locked onto enemy drones, firing bursts of plasma that lit up the night sky. "Hold steady," John shouted as the ship shook from a near miss. "This is insane." Kara didn't respond, her focus unbroken. They'd reached the heart of the facility, where the portal generator stood, a massive, swirling vortex of energy encased in an intricate lattice of alien metal. Its glow was blinding, casting an otherworldly light across the battlefield. As they hovered above the generator, Kara activated the ship's weapon systems. "Shielded," she said, her voice grim. "Must disable manually." John groaned. "Of course we do." They landed near the generator, and the hatch opened with a hiss. The moment they stepped out, enemy forces converged on them. Kara moved like a blur, her wrist device projecting a shimmering energy shield that deflected incoming fire. John followed closely, using the alien rifle to provide cover. "Keep moving," Kara shouted, her voice sharp but steady. They reached the base of the generator, its immense power vibrating through the ground. Kara accessed a control panel, her fingers flying over the alien symbols. "Few minutes," she said. "Cover me." John nodded, his heart pounding as he turned to face the advancing troops. No pressure. The battle was chaos. John fired blindly, the rifle's recoil jarring his shoulder with each shot. Explosions erupted around them, sending showers of debris into the air. Despite the overwhelming odds, he held his ground, driven by a mixture of adrenaline and sheer desperation. Behind him, Kara worked furiously, her face illuminated by the glow of the generator. "Almost," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the noise. A sharp cry broke through the chaos. John turned to see Kane himself, flanked by heavily armed guards, striding toward them. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with rage. "Carter," Kane shouted, "step away. You don't understand what you're doing." John aimed the rifle at him. "Oh, I understand just fine. You want to play God, but you're going to get us all killed." Kane sneered. "You're throwing away humanity's future for an alien's lies." Kara didn't look up, her voice cutting through the tension. "Done." The generator emitted a high-pitched whine, its glow intensifying. Kara grabbed John's arm and activated her wrist device, creating a shimmering portal behind them. "Go," she commanded. John hesitated, glancing at Kane. "This isn't over," he said, before stepping into the portal with Kara. The generator exploded as they disappeared, the shockwave ripping through the facility and sending a brilliant column of light into the sky. They emerged on a quiet hill overlooking Earth's horizon. The stars above were calm, as if oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. John sank to the ground, his body trembling from exhaustion. Kara stood beside him, her violet eyes scanning the sky. "Portal destroyed," she said softly. "Invasion delayed." "Delayed?" John asked, his voice hoarse. "You mean they'll try again?" Kara nodded. "Yes, but Earth has time. Must prepare." John let out a bitter laugh. "Great, just enough time for humanity to screw it all up." Kara crouched beside him, her expression serious. "Not all humans, like Kane. Some fight for more." Her word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. John looked at her, and for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. "All right," he said, standing shakily. "Let's make sure Earth is ready." Kara gave him a rare, faint smile. Together. The stars above them seemed to shine brighter, as if watching the unlikely partnership that had just formed. A human and an alien united against impossible odds. And for the first time, John believed they might just stand a chance.